days. What?
We have an unidentified flying object.
And they accidentally hit the power grid for Bellagio and knocked the power out for 3 days. Well, this is unheard of because casinos have to have backup power because there's so much money rolling around. But for some reason, they had no power for 3 days. They had to send all their guests to other hotels, and then they had to keep it a secret what happened. They had to make accidental disclosure forms for all the people from Nevada Energy to help work on it, because, of course, Nevada Energy wouldn't have known anything about this, but they would have had to be there to help repair the system because they hit the main grid, power grid for Bellagio.
That sounds like one of the biggest massive cover-ups around. So you go to every single casino in Nevada and say, hey, look, you're going to sign this non-disclosure agreement and not talk about it. Let me also ask you, Hollywood has its way of talking about Area 51. You have Ronald Emmerich's Independence Day where they get into Area 51. And then there's Zero Dark Trinity, Catherine Bigelow's movie about the Bin Laden raid, and they're in Area 51 dealing with this special new technology, aircraft, helicopter / what you will. I know that they were thinking about making a Bob Lazar movie, and they're going to cast Matt Damon as Bob Lazar. Did you hear anything about that, and is that still a work in progress?
No, that was 20 years ago they were doing that, and the actual recordings that New Line Cinema made are on the Bob Lazar website, and they interviewed him. And there's a lot of really good information. But just going back a few minutes, did you say notify all the casinos in Nevada?
Yeah, you said that there was a major power outage, and they went to the casinos in Nevada to tell them, hey, look.
No, just the Bellagio.
How did it go?
Just
Bellagio.
Bellagio. They were making a no track under that one, and they hit the power grid at Bellagio, and that's the only one that had the power out.
Yeah, back to Area 51. When Bob Lazar was there during in the briefings that he read about a firefight at Area 51, but really you uncovered that it took place at Dulce, correct?
That's correct. We knew that about before, and we had told Bob about that before, and he said, I read a briefing that told exactly the way I told it, which was 40 scientists were being given a briefing by one of the Greys, and a Delta Force knew that they were not to go anywhere near a Grey with a loaded sidearm. Somehow, one of the Delta Force accidentally walked into this room with a firearm, a pistol, in a holster, and there was no questions asked. The Grey just killed him immediately. And the rest of the Delta Force were watching on video, on the video that was recording all this, and they went to take revenge. And when they all stormed down there, the Grey just killed them all. And there was 40 scientists and 26 Delta Force that were killed. And some people have manufactured this into a war. It was not. It was just a very unfortunate accident.
Now, since then, Philip Schneider was one person that talked about this a lot. Do you think that's the same incident, or is he incorrect, or possibly maybe a disinformation agent? What's your thought on him?
What does he say about it?
Philip Schneider was the person who said that he was encamped.
Phil Schneider. Yeah,
yes.
No, he just took stories that he heard and manufactured them. Now, he did work underground, but I don't think he worked at Dulce, and there certainly wasn't a Dulce war, and he certainly didn't get wounded like he said he did.
You know, speaking of Dulce, we mentioned Sandia. Can you tell us about Sandia?
Yeah, Sandia is a corporation. It's also a mountain in near Albuquerque. It's used in many different things, but one of the things that the government uses to hide a new project is to use an old name, so that it's ever mentioned, nobody will ever wonder, oh yeah, I wonder what that is. But they use the old name so that if it comes up, like if somebody says, oh yeah, I was over at Sandia the day, somebody will just blow it out saying, oh, he was over at the corporation or something like that. And it's a very effective way to keep something quiet.
That's a good way. Like you said, use a common name. That way people aren't thrown off by hearing some exotic name. Nonetheless, when we had Senator Gravel on, and actually during the citizen hearing, he talked about the military space program, and then again he did when we had him here on the station. Do you know anything about the military space program?
Yeah, they used the money that they were going to use um, for the Apollo program. Well, actually, they used money from Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. They used all that money to build their space platforms. They have 24 platforms, all weaponized. They use a molecular dissociation weapon that disintegrates anything they shoot at, like they destroyed the World Trade Center 1 and 2. That's why there was very little debris left. If you used a conventional explosives to level the World Trade Center, there should be at least 13% or 13 stories left of debris, and there was barely one story left of debris, and everything that was disintegrated, all that concrete and steel was disintegrated into pieces of dust that were about 80 millimeters in diameter, and that was what was not millimeters. I'm trying to think of the word for it. Anyway, that was the dust that was floating around Manhattan. You saw those great big clouds of dust. That was the steel and the concrete being disintegrated by the molecular dissociation. And you can read all about that in Judy Wood's book, How the Towers Fell, which is an excellent book, which has chock full of diagrams, pictures, everything. And she really has it nailed to a weapon of disintegration like that.
We got about 5 minutes till break, but you brought up a good point, 9/11, and I figured we could use this a few moments to talk about that. That seemed very odd when you hear all these engineers around the world saying it's not possible to bring down a building with a 747. It was built to withstand a crash of a 747. And if it had crashed in such a way, wouldn't it have it toppled instead of falling straight down? So nonetheless, everything just seemed fishy. And what you're saying about it disintegrating seems to fit very well. Do you think this was a false flag? And I've heard that also Israeli Mossad was involved. And if so, do you know how?
I don't know who was involved, but there's certainly no airplanes crashing into the World Trade Center. The one at the Pentagon was a flyby. They flew by at 400 feet and went on to land at either Andrews or some other place. And the bomb in the Pentagon building was just conventional explosives. And the lady that, I'm trying to think of her name, April Gallup, was right 40 feet from that explosion, and she climbed out that hole with her 6-month-old son, who was in his car seat, and she went for triage on the grass, and she said, I saw no airplane, no drone, no helicopter, no nothing, and there was no smell of fuel, no jet fuel, no diesel, no aviation fuel, nothing of that sort. And the Army tried to get her to change her story, which she never has. And as far as the crash at, what was the name of that city in Philadelphia?
I don't recall the name of that city, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Where I think, was it crashed or was it shot down?
No, there was no airplane there. As a matter of fact, the ACARS unit, which is the unit that transmits engine and airplane data automatically to the ground, was still going, transmitting 4 hours after the alleged crash in the place.
Agreed. You know, I hate to change this topic, but I guess we're talking about holograms. This would be a good point for you to bring up that story that you said. I don't know which room it was, but there was a presentation going on, and this person came out and spoke. I don't know if it was to filmmakers or what, and at the end he kind of winked out as if this person was the hologram. Can you tell us the details of that story?
Yeah, that was a presentation to the TV executives and movie executives about 10 years ago, and they were invited into auditorium, and it was regularly lit. It wasn't dark or anything, and a guy comes out from behind the stage and gives his talk on the history of television. And then the person I know that was there said it was really boring because he talked about the history of the vacuum tube and how that helped the television. And as he talked, he came down from the podium, stepped off the stage, walked up one aisle, walked down that aisle, walked up another aisle, walked down that aisle, back up on the stage, and then when he was done, he said thank you, and then winked out. And then nothing happened to that. People were told that that's the future of television, that it's a holographic image. And of course, it's developed a lot since then because the Japanese have now developed holograms which are touchy-feely. And that means you can actually touch the projected holograms, which would be very interested for a certain industry that Hollywood's become involved in.
You know, this is going to be the future, and already they've already weaponized holograms, correct?
Weaponize them like what?
In the sense of using them to scare people by saying a big object is flying over or a plane.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you know of any instances in the recent history that have been used them, such as our wars going on in Afghanistan or Iraq?
No, I'm sure they did, though, but I don't know of any specific.
Everybody, hang tight. We'll be right back with John Lear and Jeremy Corbell in a few short minutes. Third Face of the Moon Radio will be right back. Thank God, actually, I was going to bring you on and ask you the question because you've spent years, producing this film on John Lear, which, by the way, let me add, the other websites as well. Everybody, if you want to see Jeremy's projects, go to jeremycorbell.com. It's JeremyCorbell.com. Also, therealjohnlear.com, Lear for Lear. And, of course, his daughter's site, if you want to check out some amazing web art, is Jill Lear, Jill Lear.com. Be sure and check all those out. But Jeremy, in your years of working with John Lear to get this movie out, what was the most startling information that you came across?
I think John is the most startling. Look, I was fascinated as a young child hearing George Knapp bring John Lear and Bob Lazar on the radio. That essentially weaponized my curiosity into these subject matters. And it was kind of like a childhood dream to reach out and speak with John. I kind of remember, John, maybe you'll remember this, but it took a long time for John to open the door for me. I mean, I was trying to contact him for a long time. And finally, when he did let me in, and we sat across his desk, he was kind of, I don't know, John, what you were doing, pressuring me or testing me, but, I had to ask the questions. If I didn't ask the questions, I wouldn't get the answers. So really, it's been a learning process with John. The process has been to learn the right question to ask. And if, something I admire about John is if he believes or feels that he doesn't know the answer, he will tell you that he doesn't know the answer. And then when he offers you what he believes to be true, it's up to you to question it. It's up to you to give it a test, to push on it. And John wants that. He doesn't intend for you to accept everything he believes, but rather, I believe, he intends to weaponize your curiosity and imagination. So the most startling thing that John ever told me was the first day I went to his house, and I said, John, what is the most amazing thing you've never told anybody? And for years, he still hasn't given me that answer. But I asked John, John, can you prove to me right now UFOs exist? John, do you have anything, a piece of paper, anything you can show me, one thing? And honestly, it's not one thing that brings someone to the conclusion that, yes, we are being visited by other intelligences, and yes, our government knows about it, and yes, this has been happening for a long time, and yes, there are even scientists that work on and back-engineer these technologies. It's not one thing that brings you to that conclusion. Like when we held the citizen hearing, over 40 witnesses, everybody from astronauts to pilots to ex-military, giving testimony in front of congressional members, a senator, right? It's the accumulation of all of these experiences. It's the accumulation of all of this data. It's the personal witness reports, the millions of them over decades that will lead a person to understanding the true nature of reality. And that true nature is very simple. We are being engaged for a long time now. And I really appreciate these years that John has opened the door to me because, honestly, it's made me a better person. It's made me a more curious person. So, John, I want to thank you publicly on the radio for the time you spent with me over these years.
Okay.
And John and Jeremy, I want to thank you both. John, you too. I've been following your work since 1989. I believe that first lecture you made before Bob Lazar came public, I don't know, maybe it was 1990. Literally, since I was a youngster, I was following the work, and to finally be able to ask you questions that I've built over the last 2.5 decades is, to me, a great honor. So I am thank you publicly as well for answering these questions and for coming on the show. To me, it is a great honor. We've had very distinguished guests on the show. We've had, as you heard earlier, astronaut, from the citizen hearing, Senator Gravel, you name it. People have been on it, but you have been one of the people that I've wanted to speak for the longest time. So for that reason, I want to thank you and Jeremy for procuring this as well. And that's why I'm really excited to see this movie when it comes out. And speaking of movies, Jeremy, you got a couple more that are related to John, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, I've been a busy boy, so all of that will be coming out. Right now, my main focus and intention is to work on Immaculate Deception. That is kind of the passion project that opened all of the other doors for me when dealing with these extraordinary experiences that people have. But yes, you are right. I do have other films that I've been making, and all of those will come out in due time. But right now, I am primarily focused on working to bring to life this story of John Lear, who I really believe to be a pioneer in these fields. And I also just want to say, somebody that John will admit, really helped bring this to the forefront, in this world is George Knapp, investigative reporter from Channel 8 in Vegas. He's the one that broke the Bob Lazar story. But also, he's the one that took the risk of bringing John onto television, which he did before the Bob Lazar days. He did that when no one else wanted to pick up the hot potato John was passing around. And George Knapp, although he didn't believe what John was saying, he did take a risk of bringing John on television and giving him a moment to say what he believes to be true. And that really was the critical moment in ufology when, pilot, an ex-CIA pilot, John Lear, decided to tell the world what he believed to be true.
Agreed. And, at the time, it was very taboo to talk about anything. If you talked about anything beyond Roswell, you were alien abduction even, you were definitely considered one of the tinfoil hat cuckoo people. But nowadays, things have changed. I remember when documentaries on UFOs were out in the 80s and 90s, for every 1 minute of a ufologist speaking, there was 1 minute or more of a skeptic or debunking the entire story. So clearly we're evolving to a much greater level of openness. And I wanted to pose this question to both of you. The citizen hearing did some major impact in awareness and getting to disclosure. But John and Jeremy, both of you, what do you think it's going to take to get disclosure, to get open contact?
Disclosure won't happen for 100 or 200 years. Billions and billions of dollars are spent every day to keep this a secret. And the ETs made a deal with our government that they would get all kinds of technology that you can't even believe is there, but they get all this free stuff for helping them keep the secret. So there's not going to be any disclosure within the next 100 years, so don't look for it.
That's one thing I feared. I think especially now because 50, 60 years ago, everything was in government hands. But my fear is that everything is now in private corporations' hands, and they don't have to answer to the people. And that's what fears me. What do you know about that? Do you know Philip Corso and how he seeded the information? Do you believe his story?
Most of it is true. Lear Incorporated was my dad's company. He formed in 1930 after he and Paul Galvin started Motorola. My dad split off, sold his half to Paul Galvin, and started Lear Incorporated. Lear Incorporated did a lot of military business, and in 1952 was selected to the prime contractor to develop anti-gravity. And they developed it and had it finalized by 1956. We've had our own saucers flying since then. And of course, anti-grav has developed there's all kinds of different types of anti-grav, but it's way and above what the average person knows about.
You know, we are actually joined by a new caller, area code 717. Welcome to the show. What's your name?
Hey, how you doing? This is Dan Bankert, part of the Living Moon Forum, also known as Shot in the Dark. How you doing?
Excellent. You have a question for Jeremy or John?
Yeah, to talk to John. It's been a while, John. You probably remember who I am. Can you hear me?
Yep, fine.
Yeah. Hey, how you doing, John? It's been a while. John, I think a very interesting story that you told years ago that people might be interested in is the guy that built the gigantic excavator that he actually had to take a plane to fly it up around the excavator that went to the moon. And the thing was so big that the guy could not calculate exactly how large this machine was. And the thing was, John said, well, how did they get this object to the moon? And the guy said, I don't know, because that's how compartmentalization works. And the bucket excavator, the giant bucket excavator they took to the moon many years ago. He wants to comment on that.
I met that guy in Idaho. I had to drive 12 hours up there, and the guy lives actually in a hole in the ground. There's just a door that you pull up, and it's a concrete room, and he's always got oxygen on. He worked for the government for many years, probably 40 years, and he knows a lot, but he couldn't tell me too much because he was afraid of his life. But he did tell me a couple of things, and one of them was that he was supervising the construction of a piece of mining equipment down in Alabama, and that it was so huge that when they were finishing it, he actually had to rent a little 172 to fly around it to see just exactly how big that thing was. And then I said, so how did they get it to the moon? He said, I don't know. And that's typical of compartmentalization. They never tell the whole story.
Exactly, and that's exactly what the secret space program. The secret space program comes in because that's where NASA is misdirection for everyone out there that thinks that NASA and rockets are what is it. Is completely off base, and that's what mainstream media wants you to think. The real space program was out in Nevada for a number of years. Now, I'm not sure it's still there or not. I know there's a place very secret south of West Wendover, Nevada. It's probably the most secret place out there. You can't see it on Google Maps or anything. But the real space program was in Nevada all along when they were saying it was in Florida and, in Texas. And the secret space program is probably what took that piece of equipment up to the moon. Would you agree with that, John?
Yeah, actually, one of the biggest launch areas is down in the Kwajalein Range, Kwajalein Islands. in the South Pacific, and the Ronald Reagan ballistic missile range is where they do a lot of launching. Now, they probably do 1 or 2 a week, and they certainly send a couple, 3 guys every launch. We're told that we have to go to Russia to get a ride up there. That's not true. We have at least 4 different rockets that can take people up there and also come back. There's one that they have that uses the pop stab dethermalizer technology to actually just float back instead of coming into the atmosphere at 18,000 miles an hour. They just float down. And this technology was developed by Rutan, who built the spaceplane #1 for Voyager, and that's the same kind of technology. What's interesting is recently there's been a lot of information about the Black Knight, and the Black Knight is something that the astronauts in Space Shuttle number 88 photographed, and NASA has said that it is a definite UFO. It's not a UFO. It's something that we developed, and accidentally the astronauts got a picture of it. And that's our technology. So if you see the Black Knight, the video of it, that's our technology. That's us. And that's the one we use in space. But the Quadrant range is where a lot of the stuff goes off.
You know, we are actually joined by another caller, and I could tell this is coming straight from London, United Kingdom. Johnny Webb, welcome to the show.
Good evening, guys. Good evening, Mr. Lear. Can you hear me?
Of course.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions for you. I've been listening in to the show for the evening, and one of the questions that I initially wanted to ask you about was what was your take on scalar weapons? Because you mentioned these exotic weapons earlier, and the fact that there's a 747 in the US Air Force that's got a scalar weapon on the front of it, and also it was more related to the flight MH370. What was your take on that 777 disappearing? And as a pilot yourself, knowing about all of the onboard systems that it uses, what was your personal understanding and take on that?
Okay, first of all, scalar weapons. That name scalar is given to a lot of different type of weapons. Yes, we have 747s that have all kinds of not only weapons on the front, but other kinds of technology. As far as the MH370, all I've had to say from the beginning about this is wherever it went, both Boeing and Rolls-Royce know exactly where it is, because there's data that goes through ACARs and other transmitter units in these high-tech new airplanes, 777 and the others, that goes directly to Rolls-Royce with engine data, and the other data goes directly to Boeing. There's no way that you can shut that information off from the cockpit, no circuit breakers you can pull, because simply that Boeing and Rolls-Royce have a vested interest in that airplane and those engines, and they never want to let it out of their sight. So they're not going to give the pilot any control over that. That also has to do with the anti-hijacking programs that are going on that are secret from the public. They're not going to let any of that information get out to the public. So all I'm saying about MH370 is Boeing and Rolls-Royce did know exactly where it went.
Agreed. You know, we've heard some really interesting stuff that the MH370 landed in Diego Garcia, and the reason being because there was some sort of patent or maybe a prototype on board carried by Philip Wood, whose girlfriend works at a Chinese military defense contractor who builds missiles. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, the patent was co-owned by co-owned eventually by the Carlyle Group. There was a company that they owned that actually owned the patent, but it would become Carlyle's. The 4 people that were on the MH370 co-owned that. There was 5 owners. So if those 4 owners disappeared in 370, the Carlyle Group would end up with the entire patent themselves, and it was worth billions and billions of dollars. So you can be sure they had something to do with it.
And I agree with what you said. Of course, Rolls-Royce and Boeing, not only do they know, but 20 years ago, the U.S. was bragging that their satellites are so good they could read the time off our wristwatch or the newspaper print in our hands. How could they lose a plane that's 200 foot long with a 200-foot wingspan was always in my mind. So very great point. I think, like you said, there are several people who do know exactly where it is. And now us searching with this little submarine is very futile. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I wanted to go back to something, back to the ET stuff. I wanted to ask you, who runs the world right now? Is it ETs? Is it MJ-12? Is it MJ-12 run by ETs?
No, ETs run everything. They're the ones that made us. They constructed us. They engineered us, and they put us here. And there's billions of Earths very similar to this one all around the universe. And the reason we're here is we all have lived many, many lives before. And in the past, whatever 2 or 3 lives, we have made a mistake. And we're down here on Earth rectifying that mistake by learning how to live with integrity and without envy, hate, or greed, and learning to love our families each and every day. And that's the only thing we have to learn here. We don't have to make money. We don't have to make big businesses. We don't have to become great people. We just have to learn how to live with integrity and without envy, hate, or greed. That's our job here. Now, when we die, many of you will remember when Steve Jobs died here about 8 months ago. The last thing he said, the minute before he died, he said,
We have an unidentified flying object.
Third base of moon.